Okay. Well, with that being said, I think it makes sense to kick off 3:05. Room's starting to fill up. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Simon. I'm one of two CEOs at Humi. For those of you who don't know Humi, we are a HR, payroll, and benefits software company. We're located in Toronto. We focus predominantly on Canada. And since the beginning of COVID, we've been trying our best to bring in experts to cover important topics for businesses, both small and large. We've covered things from legal implications of the changes of COVID-19. Today, we're here to talk about mental health in the workforce. It's something that obviously is important at any time, but I think now more than ever is a really relevant conversation to be having. We pulled in some really, really great people to help guide the conversation. I myself have no relevant background outside of being deeply interested in this space. We have three really great experts with us, Nora, John, and Ron. Nora is the founder of Bright and Early. For those of you who aren't familiar, Bright and Early is an incredible HR consultancy. Nora brings an incredible background working with some of the leading tech companies in Canada, and we're huge fans of the work that they do. John, again, coming to us from Brooklyn. He's somebody who I've known now, I think we said 16 years, and we were just catching up before this call. It's been a long time since we've caught up, but John has a background specifically in law, attended Harvard Law School and some time working in the field before shifting his focus to found a company called Mindfulness for Lawyers, specifically, again, focusing on mental health and mindfulness in the workplace. And Ron, as well, brings a really interesting background as one of the founders at SourceLine. It's an employee assistance program, but Ron specifically has spent time working with companies to address mental health in the workplace for, I don't know, decades now, Ron?
Yeah, a few decades. I have gray hair, so I guess I got that covered.
Yeah, so we've got some really great perspectives here today. Again, for people who are just joining, if you'd like to ask questions within the Q&A box, we're trying to get to them today. We also sent out a request for questions prior to the call, and so we have a bunch of great questions that we already have planned and are going to be sure to get to as well. And with that said, first and foremost, did I miss anything key there on the introductions, Nora, John, Ron?
No, I think you got it.
Yeah, no, sounds great.
Okay, cool. So, first off, I think it's important before we dive into sort of addressing questions from the audience and thinking through some of the broader implications, I'm really curious to know how you three have been keeping your own mental health in check during the last couple of months. I think that, everybody has been working to create a system that works for themselves, but most people are working from a baseline of zero experience or expertise. And so I'm just really curious to know, how are the experts taking care of themselves these days?
Okay, who do you want to address?
Yeah, Ron. I mean, why don't you kick off?
So, hey, I think it's a great question, because you know what? How we're all going to get through this is through self-care. So what have I done to look after Ron? I make sure that I carve out an hour and a half every day. I live in an area where I have really up and down walks by myself or with my wife. We go out every day. We do those walks, come rain or shine, doesn't matter. And the other is when you're working at home, is creating boundaries between what's the work part of the house and what's the family part of the house. And it's a real issue for people, especially with younger children. It's really difficult that they don't understand. But it's a big issue for people because it adds more stress on an already stressful situation. But anyway, get out there and walk and look after yourself.
I think that's an interesting point, because Nora, I know you got a baby in the background there. So how have you been managing that? Is there any specific tips given your familiarity with that particular situation?
Yeah, with great difficulty, I would say. I don't think anyone during COVID with young children will say that they have mastered the art of self-care or separating home and work. it's interesting to me because, in, the HR world, there's been a lot of talk about, work-life integration, experiments like results-only work environments where, hey, I'm going to leave in the middle of the day and go grocery shopping or pick up my kids or something like that. And it just really matters, the quality of the work and that it's being done on time, and steering away from kind of butts and chairs type of management. And it's interesting to see that in kind of a forced practice now. But on a personal level, it's tough. Thankfully, I have a really supportive partner at home. He is not working full time right now, so that's helpful, and it's not a luxury a lot of other people have. And I work for myself, so I'm able to dictate the hours a little bit more and move my schedule. But for me, it's a lot of context switching. It's, webinar to, okay, I'm going to relieve my partner and, take the baby for an hour and back and forth. So self-care is really important. And, for me, that's been like Ron, getting outside a lot. I was happy when, Ontario expanded bubbles recently, which meant we were able to go visit my parents on their farm, get out of the city. So that's been fantastic.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny, both of you mentioned getting outside, flip that over to John, who's in, the concrete jungle of New York, and also, an area that obviously has been hit a lot harder by the virus than really anywhere in Canada. I'm curious your perspective around how you've been trying to maintain your mental health during, what's going on around you.
Yeah, so it's definitely been an interesting time in New York City. Things are thankfully, at least for now, calming down quite a lot, and there's been a huge decline in COVID cases. So very happy about that. But, I'm sort of a meditation and mindfulness guy, and, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I have been meditating quite a lot. I've upped my daily meditation to about 3 hours per day now, which
Nice.
is, I know, just a sort of bananas long time to meditate. But for me, it's such an opportunity. I'm so greedy for meditation time, and to now have a little more to do it is wonderful. And I want to just be clear, by the way, that I don't expect anyone else to meditate for that long. That's ridiculous. But for anyone who has a meditation practice, this is a nice opportunity to up it 10%, 15%, or whatever. I've been doing little weekend retreats. So just in my place, because, as you pointed out, I can't really get out and about so much in the city. So I've been doing once every few weekends, not too many weekends or my girlfriend will get annoyed, but once every few weekends, and justifiably so, once every few weekends, I will just sort of hole myself up and do a little mini meditation retreat where I devote the day to silence, contemplation. My phone's on do not disturb the entire time. I'm not even reading books or newspapers or anything. I'm not consuming content of any kind. I'm just letting my mind sort of settle into the present.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and then also something that's been really valuable for me, though difficult to do, has been trying to make time for sort of non-productive time where there is explicitly nothing that I'm trying to get out of it. There's no goal. Even cultivating a skill is not in the mix, just pure sort of dummy time. So whether it's just reading a book purely for the pleasure of it, or playing a video game, or just something where it is explicitly not productive. My friend Chris Bailey, who's actually a Canadian also, he writes a lot about productivity, and I learned this from him, the importance of pure lazy time where you're not trying to accomplish anything, and that's been massive for my mental health.
That's amazing. I love it. And just for everybody who's on the call today, John, what's the longest time that you've gone in silence again? Because I think that's an impressive number.
Oh, my retreat? Yeah, so my longest one was 7 months, which is a long time. So, some would say too long.
I thought that I thought the 10-day Vipassana was like the master level, but wow.
Those are no joke, though. That's a fantastic accomplishment to do one of those.
Yeah,
just not as fantastic as what I did.
And so, yeah, I guess that puts in context, the 3 hours a day of meditation for everybody. Take your longest time and maybe adjust 3 hours to something that that maybe reflects your reality. But, coming back to, I think something that you said there, Ron, in terms of creating walls between, work and your own personal space and family time. I think that for a lot of people, that's probably the number one issue during the time of being forced to work from home is how do you structure work-life balance? And, specifically, we actually had a question from one of the attendees today, fearing that their employees may be experiencing burnout because of an inability to draw that line between sort of work and play or work and relaxation. And as an employer, I'm curious, Ron, maybe you can answer this one. What would you do in order to encourage your employees are creating that safe work-life balance?
Well, what I would tell them and what I tell employees is if you have the possibility at all, and it's very difficult if you live in a 500 square foot apartment or something, but create a space. Even if you convert a bedroom, move it something and move a desk. What I find is you can go in, you do your work, you shut the door. I'm no longer at work. I can interact with the family. I can interact with whoever I need to. It just makes that differentiation. You have people, and again, with younger children, and Nora probably knows this, in and out, back and forth. It's very difficult. Some companies are doing type A and type B meetings. Type A meetings are, really the hard meetings, and we got to have quiet. We have to have all that. Type B meetings, if your kid comes in, we don't care. So again, organizations are starting to, kind of take a look at that kind of stuff. Again, I try to encourage people to draw those boundaries where they can. Sometimes it's impossible, or you get your partner to, I know couples who one of the partner takes the baby for a walk, right? When the big meetings happen and stuff like that. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I've been telling you.
Well, I think that's interesting, but what I take from that is that the idea of creating structure that allows for flexibility or creating structure that encourages boundaries or defines boundaries on behalf of employees. Because I think that, from the perspective of a lot of our attendees today, and definitely for me as a business manager myself, it's how do you create structure for people on your team who you're trying to take care of who might not be getting this advice themselves. And so that idea of type A and type B meetings is actually really interesting. I've never heard that before. Nora, is that something that you've been using or encouraging for some of your clients?
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to mention was the importance, if you're in HR or you're a leader, anyone who's saying, hey, take some time for yourself, it's really important to model that behavior. So we haven't named, type A and type B meetings, but for us, anytime it's an internal meeting, so just, the folks on our team, it's definitely more casual, you can come dressed in whatever. And, I often, have my son on my lap for those ones as well. And in some ways it's been kind of a bonding experience to, see people's, inner lives or kids or other things that way as well. And it's important to model other behaviors as well. So, I'll tell my team like, hey, I'm really needing to take a mental health day today, or, just talk about those things as well, or talk about, how I'm doing from that perspective and have open conversations overall. So one thing that we do on our team that's pretty unique is during our weekly all team meeting, and we're a fairly small team, so, this may not apply if you have 1,000 people, but we do check-ins called out of 10. And a 10 means that, you are like peak performance, sleeping well, at your best, like feeling yourself, everything's amazing, nothing's wrong. And, anything below 5 is an issue. And you don't need to explain, what's going on in your life. You don't need to tell us about, your parents' divorce or anything like that. You can just say like, hey, I'm a 5 today, or I'm a 6 this week. And what we can do around that is, adjust our expectations and also step in and cover for each other. Like, hey, can I take this from you? Or can I take that from you? And it normalizes the kind of fluctuations that everyone experiences. So even, somebody who's, the best performer on your team, nobody's 10 out of 10 all the time. So I think like normalizing fluctuations, whether we're, in a pandemic or not, whether we're parents or not, is an important conversation to have, because everybody's mental health goes up and down.
Yeah, I love that perspective. I forget the exact practice, but Facebook, at least once upon a time, used to run something called like KPIs, team, and me. And it was important for every team leader to actually give a sort of a rundown of how they were doing to set that example to of some of the real impact that everybody's feeling and making and normalizing sharing those types of emotions. I'm actually curious, was that a practice that you guys had in place prior to COVID as well, or is this something spun up new specifically to address the circumstances?
We had it pre-COVID, actually. We really value psychological safety on our team. And one thing, I know there's a lot of HR people in the audience, and you know that HR is a practice that requires a lot of emotional labor. You hear about a lot of people's problems. You take on a lot of heavy things sometimes at work, and during COVID that's kind of amplified. So because we take on so much of that, we try and be conscious of that on our team, and be there for each other in that way. So not every team has or is going to have that culture that has kind of the open emotional factor, but some semblance of that I think is really helpful. So we've always done it.
Interesting. And then, it kind of brings me to sort of another topic that I think John can maybe speak more directly to, which is this concept of creating structured programming through the workplace that is meant to assist in mental health. And, John obviously being brought in to look at mindfulness in the workplace, I think I'm curious to hear from you. Have you seen an increase in demand for new programming? Are people just waking up to the idea of introducing this type of programming? Or what's your perspective on the use of structured programs to assist in finding balance for employees?
Well, so at least in the legal industry where I spend so much of my time, this is a wave that's been rising since well before the COVID crisis. And there's sort of a movement toward, lawyer well-being, which I think, frankly, should be more accurately called legal professional well-being, since I believe everyone in these organizations is dealing with similar stresses, anxieties. But one thing that COVID has catalyzed is an interest in more structured, more consistent, and also, for better or worse, shorter programs, because I think that attention spans virtually are shorter than they are in face-to-face space. But I think that I was, prior to COVID, I was doing a lot of sort of one-off programs, which are not necessarily my favorite, because it's like you parachute in, you do what you can in the couple hours that you might have, and then it's like, well, see you next year. And I think that more recently, the organizations I work with have been embracing this idea of these are consistent stresses, consistent challenges, and they require consistent programming if you actually want to change behavior and inculcate new habits. So I've definitely been seeing that, much more of an interest in programs that are series, programs that are ongoing, and things that provide consistent support, which I think is important.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that, we would be an organization that's probably been at fault historically in not bringing in these types of programs and just now shifting our attention to try to think through longer term programming that can be effective in assisting employee mental health.
Yeah.
And I think that, a large reason for that is that there is now a balance that people are trying to strike between performance management and work-life balance, and what you're dictating at the employer level with regard to achieving both. And I think that is, in my opinion, that the number one thing that people haven't yet solved. And it's the major question here from attendees is how to properly navigate performance management alongside anxiety that's relating to the ongoing situation, and how to either set your own expectations or set expectations for employees that relate to performance management, and how to communicate with your team on those expectations.
Well, if I could jump in, one thing that I'll say before ceding the floor to definitely the HR experts on the panel, to Nora and Ron, is to me, I think it's a false dichotomy, the idea of balancing performance management against work-life balance, where if you care about employee retention, if you care about, we can make it very concrete. If you care about recruiting, if you care about retention, if you care about those metrics, if you care about the loss of institutional knowledge and training and all these things, you want your people to stick around, right? And so to me, the idea of work-life balance is something that's in tension with performance. I'm doing everything I can to sort of convince these large organizations people aren't kindling, they're not fuel to sort of to sort of get you to hit your KPIs, right? These two things are totally harmonious with each other and support each other if you look at it from a certain perspective.
Yeah, I mean, and I completely agree with that. And I think that where some people are struggling, and Nora, I'm curious to hear your perspective, because I'm sure that this is like a daily question for you and your team, is then where to draw the line with regard to your own expectations. And if you have to shift from a short-term mindset to a long-term mindset, because for a lot of companies, moving to working from home had an immediate negative impact on productivity. Teams that didn't have experience necessarily working from home in the past and have structures in place, all of a sudden, people aren't sure how to monitor performance or monitor output. And that became the number one concern for their team. And for, I think, a lot of people, perhaps they put mental health second and are just now coming around to try to think through how to adjust for both. Is there, Nora, in your experience working with, developing performance management systems, not just now, but in the past, has there been a large shift in terms of the way that people are thinking about performance from sort of a short-term to longer-term mindset?
Yeah, I would say the current situation, although it's a pandemic, it's not good, we don't want it. I feel like it has nudged a lot of companies in the type of direction that we do try and nudge them in anyway, and I'll explain that a little bit. So generally we like to put performance management in place, because we want to avoid subjective things like, okay, how often do I see Simon in his chair? How late does John stay? And things like that. We want to concretely have an idea of, what does a good job look like for this particular role? And what do we need to do to support that? And then it makes it a lot more concrete and makes it a lot more easy to give feedback in certain areas or to set up a growth plan. So we had a number of companies that we worked with who were very anti-remote work. And one of the reasons was we don't know if people are working. And they've been kind of forced into this now, where they actually do have to define, okay, what does working mean? What's the end result that we're trying to get out of this? And what's the best way to optimize for that? And then it removes all of those other factors. So it's forcing people to get a little bit more specific, which I think is a good thing. That said, I think we just need to change our expectations of each other, during this exact time. I mean, this isn't going to be forever, hopefully. We can't expect, a 10 out of 10 if you're using the frame of reference I described earlier from everyone. And some people have kids at home and some people don't. And that just means they have less time. And is that fair? No. Will it be forever? No. So I don't think there's a perfect solution for, COVID wise, but I think overall, actually sitting down and spending the time to think what does a good job look like? And then providing the support for that. I think that's the best thing to do, pandemic or not. So I'm glad that, we're trying to think about that more.
Yeah.
Ron, I feel like, yeah.
Yeah, if I
I feel you're...
Because there's a couple of things going on. I would agree with Nora as well that, I think companies have started to wake up about FaceTime. We don't need FaceTime. If you're doing your job and you can show you're doing your job, people are happy. But I think also the companies we see that were working with us and other companies that are successful are also in this time listening to their employees. Look, this is, from a clinical standpoint, okay, I'm a clinician by my background. Okay, this is everybody at some level has some post-traumatic around what's going on here. Everybody is hunted. It's the first time in everybody's lifetime, 1919, nobody's alive from then, that we've been hunted. And therefore it creates for people who've had huge problems, let's say traumatic incidents, this then flares up This has caused a problem. But the other part is you have to listen to your employees. We're now seeing, like in Toronto, again, they're starting to open things up again. And you've got employees who've been off and they had the issue of, work-life balance and boundaries and all that kind of stuff. And now their anxiety and fear is about even not so much that the company's gonna, okay, I guess the company will take care of us at the office, but geez, I gotta take the transit to get to the office, and then I gotta get in an elevator and go to the 32nd floor with God knows how many people. So I think it's putting it into, for employers, and I think the ones that are doing really well are listening to their employees and then making, where they can, modifications to try to meet some of those needs. And that is huge for employees. And that also gives employees a slight sense of control in a time when we don't have. The other thing, if I can say about the pandemic, it's got the three worst things that happen to human beings, okay? These are values. Isolation, in the sense that you can't see the people you used to be able to see. You can't, I got a grown daughter. I haven't hugged her. I've seen her at 10 feet, but I haven't been able to hug her a few times. Okay, you have lack of control because you don't know. I can go to the store today and God knows what happens. I can get it. And you have uncertainty. So isolation, no control, and uncertainty. You want to make a human being crazy? Those are what make human beings crazy. So I think the other thing that employers are doing that I think is smart is don't think everybody's going to have their A game all the time, because there's going to be lots of stuff going on in people's lives, whether it's at home with the kids or, oh my God, my grandmother got COVID, or whatever the story is that's going to play out. And I think the companies that are really sharing that with their employees, trying to listen to them, trying to make some modifications, I think that's how we're all going to help each other get through this.
Yeah, I completely agree. So for us internal at HUME, what we recognized was that certain people who may have been really high performers just before COVID were impacted in a way that negatively impacted their performance. And initially, my inclination was, well, how do we improve this performance? What can we do to make them perform at the level they were performing at previously? But really quickly, what we came to realize was that actually accepting that lower level of performance for a shortened period of time was going to result in the optimal outcome long term. And I think that's, if I personally, and I'm not the expert, but it worked out really well for us, if there was personally one piece of advice that I would be giving with regard to performance management, it would be treat every employee on an individual basis and permit changes in performance today. Absolutely. In order to ensure, better performance long term. And what we saw from a lot of people who we actually had overt statements, in one-on-ones, hey, it's okay. If you feel like you're not performing and you feel personally bad about that, don't. That's fine for now. Let yourself, acclimatize to a lower level of performance while you're managing the rest of the stressors in your life. And what we found was that after they kind of accepted and realized that there was acceptance from a management level around that performance quality, they returned to a higher level of performance because their morale was boosted. But coming back to it, you touched on something briefly that was just asked in the Q&A here from one of the viewers, which is, we're going through this traumatic time. And for a lot of people, there are negative consequences that might not be temporary, right? There's trauma that's going to be an outcome from this entire experience. Ron, from your perspective, just being probably the foremost expert on the panel, are there specific resources that you would recommend or specific tactics that you recommend taking to help mitigate actual trauma that people might be experiencing during this time?
Well, I mean, I'd beef up whatever mental health programs you have, because you're going to see it spill out in the next number of months. And that'll even get more complicated if there's a surge, you get a second wave come the flu season. Do that. The other is, I think, just be in some ways more authentic with each other and with people in your organization. And just like you were talking about somebody, an employee who had lost people. I have a good friend, actually had his parents in New York. He lost both parents in 15 days to COVID. First his mom, then his dad. Okay, so you think he's going to have his A game? He's a disaster. And so again, how do we help them through that? Let's get some resources, first of all, to help them. It's a normal grieving. He has to grieve. He has to get through that. if there was ever a time you need to think about mental health in your workplace, this is going to be it. And it's not now. Right now, people, it's just been for me the last, I'd say 2 weeks, we're starting to see people now show it. Up until then, it was, which often happens around traumatic events. You just put one foot in front of the other, you keep going, you keep going, you keep going. Now it's starting to sink in, okay? This friend of mine who lost both parents, okay? He's thinking about it, he's got to deal with it. It's all different that way. And so let's put in the resources, let's try to help folks. Unfortunately, what can you do? You try to make your employees safe, do whatever all the companies are doing to, testing, whatever they're doing before the people come in, temperature testing, things like that, because you're not going to be able to take away the reality of, unfortunately, what's going on with it, right? You got in the US, 122,000 dead. This is not a good sign. I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, Simon, I think you're muted.
You're muted, Simon.
Sorry about that. Nora, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, so, first of all, Ron, I'm just so sorry to hear about your friend. It really brings to light, how real this situation is. And, I'm hearing a lot from, companies or clients or like people in the HR space, what's the plan for when we reopen? What do we do if we want to reopen? And, to be honest, we started working on a guide of, how to go back to the office if you want to. And then we abandoned it because we're like, we don't want or recommend anyone to go back unless they absolutely have to. Like if we gave up our office for now, like we're not ready yet. And I think unless you absolutely have to, it's still out there. In the US, we're seeing numbers spike again. I think if you're getting pressure from, executives on your team or, yourself, I think it's just step back and like think about the real situation outside of work. It's just not what we're recommending. Taking a step back from there as well, I wanted to talk about and build on something that Ron mentioned, which is just listening to employees and kind of, provide a few ways that, you might be able to do that. So, you should be having regular one-on-ones at your company. Everyone should have a manager or a person that does their one-on-ones where the person can, express, anything that's been on their mind. It's less of a status update. So that's a good time for that. Also, we've been doing, some of our clients have done like polls or surveys around, okay, do you have everything you need to be working from home? Are you comfortable? How has it been for you? And those can be anonymous or not. And then to show them that you're listening as well. Job security is something a lot of people are thinking about. And people are going through a wide variety of emotions and trauma. And, giving people praise and positive feedback and reassurance about, the good work that they are doing and how much they're appreciated. And, no one can promise job security forever, but if in any way you can, assure them on that front, that's fantastic too. And yeah, modeling the behavior, like I mentioned before. And if things get really heavy, which, we were just talking about, bringing in experts. It's not your job as an HR person or a CEO to be a therapist. And, at that point, like, we want to start looking at examining your benefits coverage and, does it cover, psychologists or just psychotherapists and looking at all of that. Our company actually just signed on with one of the virtual therapy providers that has an employer program. And we were noticing a lot of usage from our health spending account or paramedical accounts on therapy, especially during COVID. So we decided to just make it a separate benefit. And we got a package from one of those companies for, I think it was like 8 sessions per employee, plus coverage for their dependent or spouse as well. And I think like having access to experts, you can be the best HR person, the best manager and whatnot, but, people need someone to talk to right now, whether they have something, like something horrible like that around or not. It is this trauma. So yeah, providing those benefits, making sure you have a great benefits program, making people feel appreciated, and listening, whether as, you know, collectively as a survey or during those manager one-on-ones, I think are things that have helped the companies in our network.
Yeah, and I would absolutely agree, and it's one of the reasons why I was excited about including Ron. You know, SourceLine as a company focuses a lot on doing things like that, in terms of providing assistance to employees through benefits plans predominantly, is my understanding. Correct, Ron?
Yeah, well, we do a lot of training. So in this case, I would kind of agree with Nora. Like we have one-on-ones. Teaching managers and supervisors what to look for, not to turn them into clinicians, but to understand that you've got an employee who's in some distress, and then send them to your mental health or encourage them to go to your mental health program, whatever that is. Don't let them sit there and fester, okay? Because that's only going to make things worse for the employee, and they're certainly not going to have their A game and all the stuff that we were talking about. So again, you know, getting people to understand this is, you know, what's going on for this individual. Let's get them some help. Let's ask, and to get rid of the stigma. And I think finally, if this something like this virus and everything that's going on is finally maybe hopefully going to bury the stigma of mental health as an issue. I don't know what will, but anyway, I think finally taking a look at it and getting people the help they need when they need it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, sorry, I totally agree with that. I just, yeah, wanted to add the importance of, you know, EAPs and programs like Ron's and the ones that we signed up for is, you know, is that the employee has, you know, immediate access. So even if they're not comfortable talking to their manager or something like that, they can go straight to an expert and have someone to talk to if they are concerned about stigma or disclosure.
But also for the managers who are in this crazy position that they've never been in before, and especially with the pandemic. And so that they know what to do. Otherwise, they feel immobilized often. They don't know what to do.
And so that actually brings me to another question that I know is dear to your heart, Nora, but I kind of want to pose it to you, John, first, which is that from an employee perspective, so we've talked a lot about the employer perspective and the manager perspective, but one of the more important things that people can potentially help with is adjusting common mistakes that employees might be making with regard to their own mental health. And so I'll pose this to you, John, but I know, Nora, this is close to your heart too. You know, what, John, do you believe might be some of the most common mistakes that people make when trying to, you know, improve their own mental health or adapt to challenging situations? I'm sure that often you're being brought in and dealing with employees who are making a ton of mistakes. And I'm just curious to hear what you believe some of the most common ones are, because that can be an assistance to a manager or to a business owner, CEO, HR person in identifying people who might need help.
Yeah, I think I can share one or two. So I think that one common mistake is the idea that it's abnormal or something's wrong with you if you are feeling anxiety or stress or you're feeling overwhelmed, that these are dysfunctional emotions or maladaptive emotions, when they're actually not, right? It is very normal and actually quite healthy to have some anxiety from time to time, right? That we evolved that stuff for a reason. It's really only an issue when it gets out of hand, when it gets out of control. But the idea of feeling like you need to get rid of this side of your emotional landscape is just another burden on someone, because it's another thing that's wrong with them or another way in which they're failing. And I think I found it to be profoundly transformative to, in dealing with these folks, to talk about it in a way that normalizes it without minimizing it. I think that's the needle that you need to thread. You don't want to normalize it in a way that says, well, your problems aren't real problems, right? You don't want to minimize it, but you do want to normalize it in the sense of saying, this is okay, this is normal, and in many ways, this is even healthy. So there's one technique that's really helpful for dealing with anxiety that's super easy to share with people. So I might as well mention it because it's actually easy for anyone listening to this to share with other people. It's called cognitive reframing. And the idea here is that when you're starting to feel anxiety, if you just reframe it in your own mind as excitement, because physiologically, the symptoms are so similar of being just very excited versus being anxious. If you just say to yourself, oh, I'm excited right now, if you interpret, the pounding of your heart or the little bit of sweat that you're starting to develop, right, the clamminess, you're like, oh, this is how it feels when I'm excited. It turns out that actually does a remarkable amount. There were studies finding that literally just saying out loud, I'm excited, before an anxiety-provoking event will actually improve performance on whatever it is that the person's trying to do. So I don't want to turn this into something about boosting performance, but that's this idea of this physiological response is normal and is kind of supposed to be there. So please don't think it's something you need to get rid of. So that's one thing. And then I'll just briefly say one more thing around anxiety and difficult emotions where I think people make a mistake is people seem to think that, or it's not that people seem to think, it's our instinct, our intuitive response to emotions like anxiety, for instance. Our intuitive response is to get involved and try and do something about it, right? So if you have uncomfortable sensations in your body, you fight those sensations. If you have negative thoughts coming up in your mind, you start to argue with them or talk through them or spin out counter thoughts about those thoughts, right? We're getting involved. And it actually turns out that the best thing to do when negative emotions like anxiety manifest is to basically leave them alone and to just sort of allow them to be there, which means that you notice these sensations in your body, but you don't have to fight them. You notice these thoughts arising in your mind, that's where mindfulness comes in, but you don't have to get involved with their content. You just note the presence of them as a thought. So it turns out that a sort of nonchalant non-involvement is much more effective than getting entangled. And so this is a mistake that I made all the time. I'm very prone to anxiety. I had, probably still technically have, a generalized anxiety disorder. And I didn't realize that I was fighting. And in that way, I was fueling and multiplying my anxiety. Whereas now, if I wake up at 3 a.m. with a little bit of anxiety in my body, I just sort of shrug and make myself a bowl of Lucky Charms. And that's kind of, that doesn't make it go away, but I'm not fueling it. And what I've discovered is that if I insist on having no anxiety, then I'm going to have a lot. But if I make my peace with having a little anxiety, then I'll probably have just a little. So this sort of Gandhi-like, more passive approach instead of fighting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so, taking away from that in terms of, talking about mistakes that employees often make, and then perhaps a good resolution is that people often fight the things that they're feeling, and should be, as employers or as managers, we should be encouraging people to actually feel their emotions and let them occur. That's kind of what I take from it, and I think it's something that perhaps people can use as advice. Nora, I know that this is sorry, Ron, did you have something to say?
No, I was just going to jump in briefly because I totally agree with John. The other part is, if you, during the COVID time, if you don't have some anxiety and fearfulness, you're living on Mars, okay? Because of how things have changed. And the other kind of simple, non-academic definition of depression, unexternalized feelings. So just keep holding on to all those feelings, let them run around in your DVD in your head. And guess what? After a couple of weeks, it'll be a mess, right? Sorry, I interrupted.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And obviously with a clinical background, I think that your perspective is extremely relevant. But Nora, I also know that this is like a question that might be dear to your heart, and that you are often helping teams, either HR leaders or managers, work with employees who are making mistakes in terms of how they themselves might be dealing with a negative situation. And I'm curious to know what you think are common issues that you often see at the employee level that maybe managers can help navigate.
Yeah, so I want to reframe that and look at it from the angle of like signs that you can look out for as a manager as well. So I think, yeah, when someone's like work quality suddenly drops, when they just seem like not present, not connected, often when they're like snappy at you, like as a manager or a coworker or something like that, those can be things to look out for. And often, when you don't have a culture where, you're able to talk about those things, or that kind of relationship with your manager, or the ability or knowledge to go to something like an EAP, the person can just kind of, get down on themselves. It's like, okay, I'm depressed and I'm anxious, and then now I'm failing at work, and now my boss hates me, and now it just tends to spiral worse and worse. But if we can accept the fluctuation and the reality of mental health, which again, we're kind of trying to do with that out of 10, or, by having these programs in place, or having a culture where, there's less stigma and it's okay to talk about it. That you are a high performer, and you're a high performer that is going through a period of depression or anxiety right now, and that's okay. That's going to stop that whole tumble downwards where, they feel worse about themselves, their work gets worse, they end up leaving, it burns the bridge or relationship with you. Maybe things get even worse in their life, then you have to replace them. That's what we don't want. That's what we want to avoid. And, if we can support people through these inevitable fluctuations, especially inevitable during this pandemic, everyone's saying, it would be, such denial to not feel any anxiety right now. Normalizing it is so important. So, if people are starting to make mistakes, if people are, starting to be off their game, really understanding why versus getting upset with them. Or if somebody's a little snippy with me lately or something like that, not assuming that, they're disrespectful or anything like that. I always try and reframe it as okay, what's going on with this person, and trying to get to that answer as much as I can. And that's what's going to help steer things, back to normal. Sort of like what you were experiencing before, Simon, we were saying at first I focused on people trying to get their performance back up. But having those conversations with them actually built trust and security to the point where it did build that up. And that's so much better for the long term as well, knowing that your employer is going to have your back. It's great for retention, and it gets people back on track faster.
I completely agree, and I think that it's another major question that we've seen is, and you've referred now to a few, having open conversations, this 10 out of 10 concept. But what are some other tactical initiatives that companies can take in order to reduce the stigma around mental health issues? Because I think that, Ron, you mentioned it earlier, if anything, COVID should be waking companies up to the idea that mental health is an important point of discussion within the workplace. But I think the fact of the matter is that in a lot of workplaces, they were so far away from destigmatizing the conversation around mental health that even if they've moved closer to the world where the conversation is very open, there's a lot of friction in really creating a workplace that does have that open conversation. So I'm curious, what are some other tactical examples of things that companies might be able to implement to reduce the stigma around mental health and around the discussion of mental health?
Well, some companies have done things like they have mental health people on site. They have taken away the whole idea of the stigma. Hey, you can go see Ron. Actually, we do on-site stuff for some of our clients. And what happens is people don't care. And it kills the stigma. Oh, I got, my last name is Sparrow, so some of them, I got to go see the Birdman, or in the old days. So it takes away the stigma. Number two is you've got to have a champion. The C-suite has to understand about mental health, and they got to get it. It's costing them a bundle of money. They don't even know with the direct and indirect costs how much money it's really costing them. And until you educate them that getting people help early, you save the people and you actually save your organization. But again, so it's that educational thing. Okay, and then each company culture is slightly different. So what's going to fit? Okay, let's figure out what that is and let's put it in. And it's like probably Nora would say about the psychologically healthy and safe workplace. It's like the 75-page document that gives you all sorts of ideas of how to change things around to put them in place for your company, depending on its specific kind of culture. So again, go in there, figure out what that is, get some champions at the senior level, and then you start to make the changes. And once you do that, and I've had CEOs in town hall meetings said, well, I went and talked to somebody, you know what, because my life was a mess and it really helped me. All of a sudden, It changes everything. Or I did a mindfulness course, and you know what? It was the best thing I ever did.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I think just having references to it everywhere. So we do a lot of employee handbooks. So we're known for, creating these like culture books, but also policy and kind of, guide to working here. And we like to do specific references to it. Like you have a section in there that talks about, how much sick leave you can take, or like guide to different benefits in it. Talk about mental health specifically. Say like, hey, we're committed to, we're a supportive environment for mental health. And like, if you feel like you need to take a mental health day, or if you're having trouble, like here are the steps you can take. Like really just having it in there. And, if you do have a handbook is really great. And, pointing out the steps that people can take. And yeah, having those open conversations. You can have experts come in and, talk about mental health. And I think it's great to have the C-suite talk about it as well and model the behavior, like take those mental health days yourself. And yeah, again, look at your benefits coverage. If you don't see a ton of, help in there for that, give Simon's team a call, or Ron's team a call, or even, John's. It seems like everyone has some good offerings here. Consider mental health as a separate benefit if you do go with one of those programs, so that people aren't deciding between going to therapy and getting their medication for something else. Those are all ideas that, we've had good success with at lots of companies.
Jumping in briefly, I completely agree with the idea of getting more senior people in the mix. One thing that I've noticed is that when I give a training, when I give a workshop, and I ask if anyone has questions about partway through, and a partner, these are at law firms often, and a partner raises their hand and asks a question, the floodgates open. That sort of breaks the seal. And so that's one way for folks to go first, is to not just send out the email. Of course, when the partner sends out the email saying, this is a good program, I'm going to be going, you should go, lots more people go. But then when they also on top of that, so that's one thing. But then when they ask the question and actually participate, huge, I have found. Another thing that I want to mention is there are two, in my experience, there's sort of a couple different sorts of mental health programs. There are programs that are more palliative, in the sense that they are like, they make you feel better while you're doing them. So in-office yoga, massages, there are even mindfulness programs that are more like, they'll just walk you through a little guided meditation, and those are wonderful and valuable. On the other side, there are programs that actually teach skills. And by the way, some office yoga can also teach skills too, so I probably shouldn't have lumped that one in. But there's sort of programs that are more like massages for your mind and well-being, and then programs that are teaching you things that these people can take away and apply. And I'm such a big believer in mental health as a practice, as a skill that you build and cultivate, that I would encourage employers to make sure that they include a healthy mix of both, because people do need those soothing, more palliative mental health solutions, but they also need to cultivate and develop a toolkit of their own. So include both the sort of more massage type stuff and the more training type stuff.
I just wanted to add something that I didn't cover in my answer as well. So when you're evaluating something, like a partner program, or, an online therapy program or something like that, one thing that we haven't addressed, that's going on in the world right now is the resurgence of racial injustice and a lot of conversations about race in the workplace. So I wanted to touch on the fact that, not all, wellness is necessarily inclusive. One thing that we looked for in looking for a therapy partner was one that was committed to having therapists from a wide variety of life experiences, because, if I have people who are Black, or from, who are other people of color on my team, and there's only white therapists available within the coverage, it's not really speaking to their experiences. If they're going through a lot of trauma right now, it's not going to be helpful for them. So making sure that, we're culturally diverse and informed in the solutions that we bring in, because there's a lot of the wellness industry that's like pretty white, and it's not going to be for everyone. So I think that's a good consideration when you're putting in programs.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really, really great point, and something, it's a good point to end on where we're coming up to the end here. I think that there's an entire other side to this discussion around mental health in the workplace that relates to diversity and inclusion. It's probably one of the most common pain points within organizations that causes discomfort for employees is when there is a lack of diversity and inclusion. And so we plan on actually hosting a webinar as one of our upcoming in our upcoming series that's going to focus on that as a specific subject, because we do think it's extremely important, not just given the times, which have really highlighted the issue, but just broadly speaking as it relates to mental health and performance, productivity, and well-being.
Because that becomes a culture change, and that's real shift. That's second order change. That's not just information, that's changing the culture. The other thing about mental health is you want programs that are proactive and preventative versus triage and triage programs. Okay, somebody goes to the hospital bleeding, they'll definitely patch you up, but what's the issue that got you there? So proactive and preventative, that saves the employees and therefore the organization.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much. I feel like this conversation was just ramping up, and we probably could have gone on for another hour. There's a handful of really great questions. John, a funny one for you that we'll get you to answer privately afterwards, and send out to Kim, who asked it. But in any case, I really appreciate all three of you taking the time to join today and providing the perspectives. I found it really valuable myself, and I hope everybody who was on the call today did too. Again, the recording is going to be available on our website, and we'll send it around to all of the attendees today. And one last time, thank you to everybody who was able to make time to join.
Thank you.
you.
Ciao.
Thanks,
Stay
everybody.
safe.
This was fun.
See ya.